Mycenae. You've probably heard the name. It echoes from these epic poems, right? A city of gold, of heroes. For centuries, pretty much everyone thought it was just a myth. But what if it wasn't? What if the legends were real? Well, let's dig in and unearth the true story of a lost Bronze Age superpower.
And this is where it all begins. The Lion Gate, I mean, just look at this thing. For 3,000 years, it has stood right here, guarding the city. This isn't just some fancy entrance, it's a gateway to a lost world, the capital of a seriously formidable civilization that basically ran the Aegean Sea. You can practically feel the history radiating from these stones.
And that, right there, is the big mystery. Who were these people? Who had the skill and the sheer power to build a fortress like this? And maybe even more important, what happened to them? How does a civilization at the absolute peak of its power just vanish, leaving behind nothing but ruins and legends?
You see, to really get a handle on Mycenae, you have to start with the stories. This isn't just any old archaeological site. Its very foundations are tangled up with some of the most famous myths ever told.
Yep, Homer's Iliad. That Iliad. The city of Mycenae is the legendary home of King Agamemnon, you know, the guy who led the Greeks in the Trojan War. For the longest time, historians just figured that's all it was, a cool setting for an epic poem. Turns out, they were very, very wrong.
So how exactly do you prove a myth is real? Well, you get some shovels and you start digging. And the journey from legendary tale to hard archaeological fact is, honestly, a fascinating one.
The first huge breakthrough didn't even come from a shovel. It came from a book. Picture this. It's the year 1700, and this Venetian engineer, Francesco van Eyck, is out surveying the area. He'd read an ancient description of the Lion Gate by a traveler named Pausanias, and he looks up at the ruins in front of him and has this aha moment. He realized he'd found it. He'd found the legendary city of Mycenae.
And the history he uncovered was deep. I mean, people had been living on this spot for thousands of years, way back into the Stone Age. But then, right around 1600 BC, something changed. Things just exploded, and Mycenae began its incredible climb to the top.
And this period from about 1600 down to 1100 BC is what we now call the Mycenaean Age. This was the golden era, the time when all those legends were forged, all backed by unimaginable wealth and some serious military might.
Now, if you want proof of their sudden explosion of wealth, look no further than their royal cemeteries. Archaeologists found two of them. Grave Circle B is the older one, but it was Grave Circle A, dug up by the famous Heinrich Schliemann, that changed everything. The treasures inside were so unbelievably lavish, so costly, they proved the epic poems weren't exaggerating one bit.
I mean, just look at this stuff. The tombs were literally packed with exquisitely made gold, silver, and bronze artifacts. And these weren't just pretty trinkets. These were the prized possessions of powerful warrior kings and their families. This is the tangible proof of a rich, sophisticated, and very warlike society.
And among these finds were some of the most iconic artifacts in all of archaeology. The so-called Mask of Agamemnon, the silver siege Triton, the Cup of Nestor. These items absolutely stunned the world and cemented Mycenae's status as a real, historical powerhouse.
Okay, so all this power, all this wealth, it really makes you wonder, what was life actually like inside that citadel during its peak, around 1350 BC?
Well, first off, this was no sleepy village. At its height, Mycenae was a bustling city with an estimated 30,000 people living there. For the Bronze Age, that's huge. It was a thriving center of politics, culture, and trade, controlling a massive territory all across southern Greece. To protect this incredible city, they built walls. But not just any walls. They used a technique called Cyclopean masonry. The limestone blocks were so enormous that later Greeks seeing them couldn't believe humans had built them. Their explanation? It had to have been the work of the mythical giants, the Cyclopes.
And this shows their skill perfectly. On one side, you can see the sheer brute force scale of those walls. And then on the other, the incredible artistic detail of the Lion Gate carved right into them. This was a civilization that mastered both raw power and refined art. To put that in perspective for you, some of the biggest stone blocks they used weighed nearly 100 tons. Just think about that for a second. Quarrying, moving, and lifting blocks that size without any modern machinery, that is an absolutely staggering feat of engineering.
But their architectural genius wasn't just limited to walls, oh no. They replaced those early shaft graves with these incredible structures called Tholos tombs. The most famous one is the Treasury of Atreus. It's this massive beehive-shaped chamber with the soaring domed roof, an absolute marvel that stood as the largest dome in the entire world for over 1,000 years.
So who was in charge of this incredible city? Well, thanks to them finally deciphering their ancient writing system, which we call Linear B, we now know the king was called the wanax. And he sat at the very, very top of a complex and highly organized social pyramid.
And this is basically what their society looked like. The Linear B tablets lay it all out. Below the supreme wanax, you had a military commander, the laugetas. And from there just flowed down through officials and nobles to the common people, the damos, and finally all the way down to slaves at the very bottom. This was no loose collection of tribes, this was a highly organized bureaucratic state.
Which brings us right back to our big mystery. Around 1200 BC, this powerful, rich, and super-organized civilization came to a sudden, violent end. Why? And what did it leave behind for the rest of us?
The honest truth is, nobody knows for sure. Historians have been debating this for years. This period is known as the Bronze Age collapse. It could have been foreign invaders. It could have been terrible civil wars, maybe a series of devastating earthquakes. But what's most likely is that it was a perfect storm, a combination of all of these things happening at once.
But even after the citadel burned to the ground, Mycenae's legacy lived on. And this part is just mind-blowing. Their religion became the bedrock for the classical Greek gods. We know from their own tablets that they worshipped early versions of Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, and Athena, names that would go on to shape Western culture for thousands of years.
Today, Mycenae stands as a protected UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's a silent monument to a civilization that literally rose from legend to become one of the great foundational cultures of Europe, and you can still hear its echoes in our art, our language, and our stories.
So, we end with this thought. The story of Mycenae proves that sometimes the line between a myth and actual history is just a matter of digging in the right place. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other epic tales are out there just waiting for a shovel and a curious mind to prove them true?